So how long should your knife be so as to be used effectively in combat and self-defense? Well, the answer is simply 7 inches. That's it. Bye, guys. Have a great day. I'm just kidding. Stay around for a little bit longer, and I'll explain why of this. Now, the video is because of a video that I saw in Skoda Gladiatoria. Great channel, by the way, which I'll leave the link there below if you want to go check out. He had a video that says size does not matter with thrusting weapons, and it's kind of clickbaity, right? Let's call it. Let's call him out on that, because the first thing he does is explain that, well, size kind of does matter. Maybe not in the way you think, but yeah, great video. I suggest you, and great channel. Super informed guy there. But does it matter? Yes, of course it does matter. What's the length? Well, we'll cover that. The first thing he does mention, and it is very much true, which is once you go through a person, right? Let's say you have a big, long-ass blade like this, right? This bayonet going through a person completely. Whatever comes out on the other side, if it's 5, 10, or 100 feet, it doesn't really matter. It already did all the damage it could do to that person. Whatever is left makes no difference, all right? So we went from a point in which bayonets used to be, well, sort of like what you see here, like a long blade, right? Very pointy, intended for thrusting. And keep in mind, this was still being done at a time in which guns were basically like a tube with some gunpowder inside, and you only had one shot. That was the first time people considered having some sort of of thrusting weapon in the end, at the end of that gun. Then when you had lever action guns, it was kind of still the same situation. I no longer have a gun firing ammunition. I'd rather have not so much a sword or a knife. I want to have a spear. So still the idea persisted of length, of being long, a lot longer than this even. Some bayonets are ridiculously long. But this would be your typical European World War I type of bayonet, right? And it still looks extremely long. If we agree that this is what we consider today to be a modern fighting knife or a modern bayonet, right? Like the Glock bayonet, the M9 of the US, and so on, it's always kind of like on that 7-inch length, right? And that gives us an idea of, yeah, that's basically what seems to be working well. Well, why is this so much longer? And there's an answer to that, which I think is quite interesting, which is, look at the photographs. Look at how people dressed back in the day. We always go back to this idea that everything was better in the years of in the good old days past. And sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not so much. Technology in terms of clothing has advanced significantly. If you see a soldier with winter clothing these days, it looks a lot less bulky than the kind of clothing that soldiers had in World War I or World War II. You're looking at great materials, right? Wool, stuff that it would be like high quality these days, but not as technologically advanced. Today you have different layers and a thermal layer and jackets that have hollow fiber and so on, a bunch of stuff that was not accessible back in the day, and you just saw people wearing a lot more clothing, a lot more bulk and layers back in those photographs than you see today. So maybe half of this was just going through those thick winter jackets compared to what actually ended up making contact with the body, and that's where it starts adding up. You go through the big ass jacket and whatever else the guy had on top of him. So this is basically what goes through, and that's where it starts to make a whole lot more sense. These days, people are not likely to be wearing such bulky clothes. So yeah, this is how you end up. And why is this? Well, this is kind of the length you need so as to go through whatever clothing, jacket the person is wearing and still have enough length to reach internal organs that will incapacitate that person, right? So a couple of these inches gonna be clothing and stuff. The rest of it is gonna be effective damage in that body. And here's where you see some of the laws that you have in different countries where, for example, in the UK, you have 3-inch non-locking blade, non-fixed blade. This is kind of like 3 inches, I guess. So even this, but this is a fixed blade. So this would be completely illegal to have in the UK. Not in other countries, but in UK it is. In other countries, you have a limit of 4 inches, right? So 4 inch, 10 centimeters, that's the limit of what you can have as a folding knife or as a knife. And yes, sure, some countries have no problem with whatever blade length. I don't really think it makes that much difference. It's more about a societal problem. I mean, best example is actual freaking UK, where people stab each other all day long. Those laws don't do a damn thing because there's nothing easier to make than a pointy, sharp object, and yet, they still persist. Well, politicians doing their thing, like banning zombie knives, whatever the hell those are. But the idea of a certain blade length being deadlier than others, that is very much true. And it's not always a rule set in stone. You have plenty of examples of people that have been very much killed with under 4-inch blades. I actually have done videos about this recently with that man defending himself in the Apple River. One of the incidents I remember very well was this Russian teenage girl that stabbed a friend of hers, for no reason. She just felt like doing it. She had a butterfly knife, a balisong knife that was definitely under 4 inches based on what we could see there. And she just stabbed him right in the chest. Unfortunate enough, he got stabbed in the chest and he ended up passing. In the case of the Apple River, the man used that blade against one of the attackers that happened to be a female, a 20-year-old girl, right? Or woman, because she was probably about 20 years old. But they were in the river. She was wearing like a tiny bikini, so you could see her body. She was a very slim, tiny girl. So in that case, with his probably 3-4 inch blade, he actually punctured one of her wounds based on what we saw during the trial. So you can actually reach the lung of a petite small girl, maybe not so much on a big dude, and maybe far less so against a guy that is big and is actually wearing combat clothing and vests and so on. So that's not likely going to be the case. Against a little girl in a bikini, maybe so. But that gives us the idea of those 4 inches. And that's because of the average size of a grown male body. That's kind of how much you need so as to actually reach. Again, it is not true that with less blade you cannot use it effectively. It's simply not going to be statistically as likely to be lethal when just randomly stabbing into a human torso of a adult male, right? And that's why we end up with these blade lengths. Now, again, the Special Operations Service during World War II, they had even thumb daggers that were basically something that was maybe 2-inch blade with a little circle there, and you hold it like that, and you kind of went for the neck with that thing. Can you actually kill someone with a 2-inch blade, stabbing them in the neck? And yeah, sure you can. I mean, you get the carotid artery and you open it up, the guy's going to be bleeding out like a pig in just a few seconds. Is that ideal for knife fighting or combat or going for your K-bar in the trenches? No, you want to go for a K-bar in the trenches, right? Or maybe even something a little bit even stabbier. K-bar, by the way, has proven to be extremely effective. And by the way, this is my original World War II era K-bar knife, which is one of my most prized possessions in my knife collection. But here you have the perfect example of clip point, very stabby, very pointy, and then you have also a very broad blade, which probably made it more effective than the slimmer stiletto sort of blade, right? There's still this idea of the stabbier, more narrow blade being more likely to penetrate effectively to that desired length, but still very effective. Yeah, this is all like, it's all grease just to keep it from rusting. But yes, this length is definitely the way to go in terms of fighting knives. That does not mean that with a smaller blade you cannot do quite a bit of self-defense. In fact, the Spyderco is the Endura, the classic Endura, is a favorite knife among many guys in the military, mostly because, especially the ones that want to have something very lightweight. Maybe the ones that are a little bit more knife guys, they will have a zero tolerance or something, right? Maybe a cold steel or something more tactically bulky and whatnot. But for the guys that want something slim and that just works very well, this is a great way to go. 4-inch blade, great penetration, and yeah, using it in the right manner, it will be super effective. Don't doubt that for a second. But this is probably even more so, right? And there's something else to consider, which is when you go against the human body, we are pretty elastic. You have skin, you have fat, you have muscle, all of which will give to some extent. I actually have one little stabby wound here, which self-inflicted, by the way, while screwing around with a butterfly knife, with a balisong, just went out of my hand and went right there, stabbing me right in that spot where I have that little scar. And it opened up quite nicely. I could actually see, it went all the way through the layer of skin, and I could actually see the red underneath of the muscle in the arm. So that was a nice little cut, which probably would have required stitches. I didn't do that, so yeah, now I have that thing there. It's not that bad. But my point is, when you have, let's say you have a 2-inch blade, and you end up stabbing with that, it's probably going to be doing a 3-inch wound. Why? Because it goes deeper than you would initially think, because we're not made of wood, we are flexible, so it's going to be penetrating deeper than what you would initially think. It punches beyond the length of the blade, and when you bring it out, it's going to be leaving a deeper wound than what the blade length actually is. Okay, there's also this I was seeing of a guy in YouTube talking about conversations with Vietnam vets that were taking down sentries and guys, and one of them, using the technique of holding and stabbing through the neck, he actually stabbed himself through in the arm, because it went through the guy's neck and into his own arm. And when he tried to pull it out, it wouldn't go out because he stabbed into the bone of his own arm. That's actually something that I've heard more than once before. There's a gaucho from Argentina, Moreira, a guy that was known for being involved in a number of knife fights, right? And he had a long facón knife, a facón knife, in case you're not familiar, is a traditional Argentine fighting dagger, which is, this is actually, Moreira's dagger is even longer than that. It's about the length, actually. Moreira's facón is about the length of this bayonet right here. So a guy came at him with a rifle, a soldier came at him in a pulperia, imagine like a bar setting, something like that. So the guy went after this gaucho. He stabbed him through the torso with so much force that it went through the guy's spine. And Moreira lost his knife. He actually says that I think he said that he placed his foot on the body of the guy and kicked him away so as to pull out his facón, because it was stuck on the guy's spine. So yeah, pretty brutal stuff, but it just goes to show how the length sometimes may be excessive. Maybe it's too much. You stab yourself, you stab through the other side of the guy, and we basically end up with this. 7 inches, guys. 6 inches, 7, maybe a bit longer, but 7 inches is the Goldilocks length. I took that into consideration myself with my own knife, right? This is the Goldilocks length for a do-everything knife, including the potential use for defending yourself, right? That's basically what you want to have. And guys, that's basically it. Remember that if you want to learn more about all of this stuff, is including using knives for self-defense, right? And using techniques to defend yourself against knife attacks, or using knives against attackers. I cover all of that in Street Survival Skills, which will give you an upper hand, especially if you have to use a shorter blade, or some techniques on using longer ones as well. That's going to be all. See you on the next video. Take care.